Hey, hey.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Hello.
Welcome. Welcome in. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining us this morning. So we're starting our journalist workshop. Today we're discussing costume design for film. And we have wonderful, fascinating speakers on our panel that I will introduce to you in just a second. So just wanted to make sure that everyone can see my screen. Please, guys, everyone mute yourself. Okay, there will be time for all to ask questions, so you'll be able to go unmuted and share questions as not possible. Please mute yourself. I see that some are still unmuted. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, Alisa, yes, please mute your mic. I can try and mute you as a host, but maybe you can do it yourself. Alisa Seagard, can you mute your mic? Yes, thank you so much. So guys, before we start, all our guests, attendees of our workshop, please introduce yourself in the chat, share where you are joining us from, what's your major if you're currently studying at the academy, or what's your profession if you are an outside guest, and what brings you in, what's your interest in costume design. So go and share your contacts, share your information, and connect with each other through the chat while we are presenting for you the content of our workshop. I see also our esteemed professors joining us. Hersha, so good to see you. Thank you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So good to see you. Yes, it's been a long time.
I know. Miss you, Elena and Alina. And I see some of my students in this presentation. So hi guys. I'm going to mute myself now.
Thank you, Hersha. All right, so we'll go forward. I'll introduce our panelists. I apologize if there are other instructors joining us. I'm trying to, again, I'm hosting and moderating at the same time. It's always a little challenging. So I see Kirsten Coachman from RT News, who is joining us today. Thank you so much, Kirsten. And so many of our students and alums and guests of the Academy. Okay, let's get started. So our speakers today, Alexey Buloukhov, Diane, Dorrans, Saeks, and Alina Bokovikova. I'll introduce each of them. So Alexey is joining us from Valencia, Spain. Hello, Alexey. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello, yes. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I muted myself as well. Hello.
Yes. So Alexey is teaching blogging, content creation and promotion, and social media content development at the Academy. And he prepared a special piece for Fashion School Daily, reviewing costume design nominees of Oscars, the upcoming Oscars ceremony. So we'll discuss the nominees, of course, and I'd love to hear Alexey's insight on each of the nominees. So we have Diane Dorrans Saeks with us, who is teaching fashion criticism, runway research and reporting since almost 20 years, Diane, right? That you've been teaching with us at the Academy. Diane is best-selling California-based author, editor, design lecturer, fashion writer and editor, and a long-term reporter for Women's Wear Daily in San Francisco. And Alina Bokovikova, costume design coordinator. Thank you, Alina, for joining us today. Alina is coordinating costume design program, and she's distinguished costume designer and experienced educator. So I would love to hear her insights about costume design for film. She'll walk us through the process and bring us behind the scenes, behind the screen of costume design for film creative process. And all together we will discuss the Academy Awards nominees at the end of the workshop. And I'd love to hear insights from Hersha as well. Our today's agenda. So as always in our workshops, we'll walk you through the topic basing our conversation on 5 W's of journalistic process. So we'll talk about what costume design for film is, when it appeared. We'll discuss the main power players, iconic names. We'll talk about why costume design is important, and especially costume design for film, and why it matters for the current fashion media landscape. Well, overview who is designing costumes for film. We won't be able to talk about all the names. So if you guys want to share your favorites in the chat or at the end of the workshop with us, you are more than welcome to. But most importantly, we'll dive into the specifics of the creative process. So we'll really use the opportunity of having Alina with us today, who will share with us what the challenges of creating, designing for film are. Well, briefly overview who is writing about it. And again, we won't be able to go in depth for that. So if you guys want to share your favorite stories in the chat, please go on. And then as always, at the end of the workshop, I'll share with you the slideshow. So no need to do screenshots or whatever. The workshop is being recorded. I'll share the Zoom recording with you tomorrow, and we'll post it on YouTube. So there will be plenty of opportunities to review the conversation today, review the resources we'll be sharing. And if there will be a lot of additional materials and resources that will be brought up during the workshop, then I'll update the slideshow and share it with all of you tomorrow with the updated list of recommended reading. And then we'll again briefly talk about how to write about costume design for film and what are the main challenges. It would be fantastic to hear from Alina, her perspective as costume designer. What are topics that lack coverage in the media currently, and we'll talk also about some controversies and the future of costume design for film, the awards, conundrums around it, and of what writing about costume design for film entails. So what is a costume design? I'll pass mic now to Alina because she's better than anyone else in our room can tell us about the definition of it. Alina, you're muted. Alina, you're still muted.
Of course, you see, I'm a good student, right? You said to mute yourself.
Thank you.
I am doing it. All right. Hi, everyone. One more time. So what is a costume design conversation? We'll start with what is a costume. And actually, I do have some students here, right? So maybe some people want to tell me what is a costume. Anyone? Let's have, a little bit more interactive conversation. Anyone want to jump in? What is a costume?
We all know, but it's hard to say.
Any ideas?
Alina, go on. In a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Isabel.
Yes, a costume is what helps make the character stand out and be unique. And it's something like a calling card to show like their personality or how they interact with other people in the film.
All right, absolutely. So costume is definitely all about the character, but then what it is, it could be layers of different costume pieces, right? It could be clothing, accessory, whole look from head to toe, very complicated, as you see in the first image, for example. Or costume could be nothing at all if that is a choice and appropriate motif for the character. So absolutely, costume design is clothing, and many other jobs are dealing with costumes, fashion industry, for example, right? But if in fashion you are dressing yourself or you are targeting your clients, here we are targeting the character, the personality of the character that we have in a medium. So this is what is a costume. And then costume design is obviously all about the job and profession who is trying to realize it.
Thank you so much, Alina. So we'll, we'll turn now the question, pass the mic to our speakers, and we'll review some iconic films and iconic costume designers, and we'll discuss what makes them really impactful. And again, I'll leave the mic now again with Alina, because she did share with us her selection of historic famous costume designers. So Alina, over to you again.
All right. Hello. The first name that many people have in mind is definitely Edith Head, right? And also this lady was featured in animation coming, for example, through Incredibles. And so many knows Edith Head. Before her and before 1930s, the golden age of Hollywood, many actresses even put the looks of their characters themselves. And so basically with 1920s towards 1930s, we are talking about professional costume designers. And Edith Head had like 50 years career and designed so many films that everybody can name. And her sketches, you can see, are obviously, you know, the traditional renderings for the costume designers' medias. So let's move on to the next. So now we are talking about Iran Sharaf, another costume designer who brought really wonderful historical costumes. And here you can see her Cleopatra looks. Iran came from fashion design, and so we are all familiar with her wonderful inspirations. And she also brought a lots of inspiration through the history. So that would be her big feature in a costume design. So who's next? Iko Ishioka would be really distinguished costume designer that comes from Japan. And she brought absolutely amazing looks for her cultural perspective and lots of really bright colors, even we are not kind of associating this with Japan. So she has lots of stylized costume design, while many featured films are trying to you know, really dig for realism. Iko Ishioka brings lots of conceptual interpretations to the costume design. This is kind of her feature. All right. Okay, Sandy Powell. Everybody knows this name. Amazing modern days designer who truly brought lots of historical films, many times winner of awards, and she really digs to the details. Like we can see her attention to personality and details through historical characters. All right, Michelle Clapton. Nobody can resist, right? Like she's the name right now. Absolutely. Game of Thrones, one of the most amazing current series. And I don't know, she almost brought back the interest to costume design, right? Like many people was watching the series because of the costumes. So definitely it's a big name now in the industry.
Such a gem. Yes, we definitely owe her the interest in the media, the costume design. I also think that for series, because they run for longer times and there are maybe bigger casts, and you know the plot is evolving through months of episodes, and that it makes the impact maybe even more visible than for one standalone movie. So now we'll talk about some iconic collaborations, and Hersha, you are so welcome to chime in and comment on those. So again, those were selected by Alina and myself, and Alina, maybe a short comment, and then we'll, if Diane or Alexey want to comment on this one particularly, of course.
Yeah. I believe everybody can, you know, definitely talk about it. This is
yeah, so those are iconic collaborations that we all know about. This is more of an actress being a muse for fashion designers. So that was more than collaboration for film. I believe it was also like a profound human relationship and friendship, human and professional at the same time. And Audrey Hepburn was a perfect incarnation for Hubert de Givenchy style in late 50s, early 60s. Diane or Alexey or Hersha, if you'd like to comment on this, or maybe a personal view on that, or a story if you want to share.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't have anything prepared, but I think that Audrey Hepburn was an image that kind of we can see all of these sort of factors coming together in the late 50s into the early 60s when innovators in fashion like Givenchy and Balenciaga and Saint Laurent started to envision a different direction for fashion, kind of moving away, like we studied in 244, moving away from the new look, you know, the 19th century body that the new look represented that Dior proposed in 1947. It was kind of the old look. And Givenchy, who studied with Balenciaga and studied under him and apprenticed with him, was very much influenced by Balenciaga's sort of forward view. And Givenchy took a different kind of approach. But anyway, point being, I think the movies that Audrey Hepburn acted in and the clothing that Givenchy designed for her, we could look at that as a really graphic encapsulation of the changes that were going on that preceded the kind of monumental shifts in culture in the 60s. And I think she represented the ingenue. We don't really use that word so much anymore, but it's youth. So let's not associate youth just with age, but with a new way of looking at everything. And I mean, this is slightly off topic, but I mean, after yesterday, I mean, I think there's so many parallels between what happened in the 60s that this new way of looking at clothes encapsulates and what's going on right now. So, yeah.
So true. So true. It's youth and freshness of youth, right? The
New
change.
ways of
New ways,
looking
yeah.
at the world and culture.
Fresh elegance as well. Thank you so much, Hersha. So moving forward, fast forward, I would say, another iconic example. So we'll talk about another chronization of Emma later today because it's one of the nominees for the upcoming Academy Awards. Alina, would you like to comment on Clueless 1995 edition?
Yeah, so I just thought it would be interesting to bring this film because that was in 1995 modern adaptation, you know, slightly adaptation of Austen's Emma, and this kind of modern take on the costumes and on the situation was really big trend at that time, and brought not just parallels to the characters, so it was really targeting the each personality of the teenagers, but at the same time those clothing then became a trend in 1995 and, you know, started to sell. So that was really big kind of fashion statement in a time as well. And I just was thinking to bring Mona May's costume design would be interesting because this year we also have nominee for the Emma, and it's the same story, but how
the classic version,
you'll see,
right?
how historical costumes are nominated and how it was in a modern way done. So I always appreciate conceptualized costume design.
Totally, and I think this is a perfect example of more of a contemporary approach to interpreting the historical masterpiece, right? So we'll see how different is the new interpretation is, much more historically accurate, but we can then discuss what can appeal as more maybe interesting and intriguing approach to us. And then on everybody's mind, Fifth Element, 1997, costumes designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier, one of his work for film. So again, Alina, Diane, Alexey, and Hersha, please go on and share your comments with us on that. Alina, what would you say from costume designer perspective,
Yeah.
not fashion design perspective?
I can say, yes, of course, like you will talk about fashion perspective. I will just say that that was almost the first sci-fi film that instead of this, really dark apocalyptic color palette, brought this new approach, really fun and vibrant, and something that apocalypses can be actually entertaining and cool. So that was new twist in a sci-fi approach to costume design. And of course, from fashion, like what could be more genius?
Diane and Alexey.
Yes, these images are marvelous, and they were intended to show a dystopian future. And it was brilliant that the director worked with Jean-Paul Gaultier, who really, he was, speaking of Fifth Element, he was absolutely in his element designing for this. It's very important to remember that costume design used to be thought of as the kind of Edith Head, all the glamorous designers in Hollywood. And that costume design was probably in the 40s and 30s, especially until the 50s, was thought of as glamour, a glamour element, bringing in the gowns, making Elizabeth Taylor look wonderful, dressing the women mostly was the idea of costume. Of course, always was men as well, like Cary Grant. But it's only really since the 50s in movies that there was a diversity. Films in the 40s, even 30s, and even into the 50s, for men, it was Westerns, dressing cowboys, dressing Western characters. And then for women, the glamour of Greta Garbo or the blonde bombshells of the silver screen. But today it can be sci-fi, it can be futuristic, it can be apocalyptic, it can be period costume. And especially today, costume is really a collaboration. The days of Edith Head sweeping in and say, this is the way I envisage Elizabeth Taylor or Greta Garbo. Now it's extremely collaborative between the director who directs the style and very often the actor as well. The actor, I'm just reading a wonderful interview yesterday between the director. I hope you've all seen Sound of Metal, which has been nominated for many awards, among them actor of Riz Ahmed. And the director and the actor talked about how they worked with the costume designer to create the characters. It's a very different direction from, for example, Gaultier coming in and designing everything. Thanks, Elena. Wonderful to see those Gaultier designs. Thank you.
I wanted to chime in quickly, if possible. This also is, to me, is an example, and much like the previous, the Givenchy, Audrey Hepburn example, I see this also as a marker of a tremendous change that happened both in fashion and in film industry, because you just don't really see major fashion designers designing for film now. And the reason I feel that happened is because the pressure both on design on fashion designers now is greater. I mean, Dior used to design for ballet, and now people who run fashion houses have to produce multiple collections, and it's a whole entire different business, which I think allowed costume design to also stand more on its own and be its own design entity, and people to work focused on that. But also because film has diversified greatly as well, and the era from to which we referred earlier, we're just producing 50 times more films now. And so everybody needs to also be clothed and dressed, but the demand for the work, both from the film industry, has grown. And so this kind of the era of one star, one director, one fashion designer collaborating, it's a very, we haven't seen that in a really quite a long time. And when we get to the nominees, it's telling that of them only one has has a fashion design experience, and all others are film design, designed for costume design specifically. So that's what I thought of.
Elena, we can't hear you. All right.
Can you hear me this way?
Yes.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Let me remove the headset. Is it okay now? It's interesting, you guys.
Yes.
I can't hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry for the glitch. So yeah, my comment was that maybe it worked so well for Jean-Paul Gaultier in Fifth Element because it was not a period film, and therefore, in a way, he had a carte blanche on inventing the characters, inventing the styles, bringing totally his perspective on this, and not being tied in with period of time. Well, he had a different experience as well with the cook, the fifth, his wife, and her lover. Greenaway film, directed film, and again, a very different approach, I would say. Alina, would you like to comment on
And
that?
Diane, thank you for bringing the topic of collaboration. And in this film, costume/fashion designer couldn't escape collaboration because the whole film's cinematography was really conceptualized for the color palette, and director of photography obviously was kind of dictating what is the main color. So you can see lots of reds, you see really saturated choices, really bold choices by the fashion designer, but he also was adapting his aesthetic to what is required by character, right? So like we can see that it's not absolutely the fantasy film choices. And so we just can get the brilliance of the costume designer here, how you can combine the creativity and restrictions of the character or, domination of director.
Absolutely.
So that's obviously a really cool film. So everybody please look at it.
Alexey or Hersha, if you'd like to comment on this before we move forward, we have more examples to show.
Sorry, what? I'm sorry. What did you say, Elena?
If you'd like to comment on this before we move forward, it's up to you. Or
I was just going to say, with regard to Gaultier, I think that he was really interested in the moving image as much as he was interested in sending clothes down the runway. And I think we can see in the films that he designed wardrobe for, his use of his fashion design vocabulary, he used that to express sort of new themes in fashion that he was taking up, using his clothes and the runway as kind of a space to perform, to provoke. We saw in the previous example his theme of kind of sadomasochistic clothing, his riffing on bondage themes, his crossing boundaries, gender boundaries, all of these things he's expressing in his design vocabulary, and he uses film and the image to kind of reference those themes in the wardrobe that he designs as well. And I'm glad that I got to learn from Alexey also about how this has changed, that films come into its own with its own exigencies, whereas there isn't as much autonomy today for the fashion designer and the creative brands who demand so much time of the designers. You don't really see the kind of autonomy that Gautier may have had during these films.
Let's move to another example that Alina suggested, and thank you so much, Hersha, for those insights. Alina, why Schindler's List?
Oh yeah, so this is another really interesting film where we want to explore the idea of the color choice. Usually we are talking about rather really colorful palette that we just seen in a Fifth Element, or black and white films that just came in the beginning of 20th century and now coming back to trends, sort of. We will talk about it. But here again, great collaboration between Spielberg, amazing director, and costume designer. It's a Polish costume designer from Warsaw, where they try to saturate color palette and bring the story of the separate characters with the choices of the clothing and color palettes. So this is just really amazing about how much details put to even present the uniform, or how aggression could be done in the details of the uniform, and how colors and blood can be brought with photography and wardrobe choices. I just thought that this is really distinguished element of the film, that even the war films could be stylized. So realism is not always dictating.
Right, and I know you're going to mention this film again when we'll talk about the specifics of the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't have a specific slide on Game of Thrones, but we'll be returning to that particular example over and over again. And interesting, maybe a little kind of side path, not an obvious choice, but again, as suggested by Alina, one of the recent success stories, another apocalyptic drama called C on Apple TV, a series, an episode. And the particular challenge in this very movie is that because of the plot, the story that takes place in distant future, where humanity, because of a deadly virus, has lost sight, and those who survived were blind. So many of the cast members were indeed blind, not the leading actors. And now that the crew is preparing for the team is preparing for the upcoming season, hopefully they are declaring that they are going to try and do a better job in casting even more blind actors in the movie. But again, it was still revolutionary in that approach. So Alina, what did that entail in terms of costume design?
All right, so for costume designer, here it's really brilliant example of inclusion, and that's why I think it's important for bringing this film. Thank you, Elena. And you can imagine that it's not just creating the world, again, apocalyptic world, futuristic world, thinking about what materials will be in that society and all of that research part. What is extremely interesting, I think, that Tricia Somerville, and we will, praise her today, Alexey will bring her name again, she was even collaborating with people who are creating the smells and tonics, because every costume has to be having specific smell, so actors who are in the blind community, they can recognize their costume, they can find it in a pile of different costumes in a racks. So this is the level of details. And of course some textiles, so they can have a knots on a costume, or special accessories so they can touch it and find and fill their own costume without the help of the crew. So to feel independence and involvement in a project. I think that level of attention to the needs and practicality in a costume design is something that we are really bringing now, so actors can feel very comfortable.
I think it's an amazing example and so forward thinking in so many ways. So I read that they had a blindness consultant on stage.
They
who
did.
was consulting actors who are not blind to be able to act as if they were. So again, from so many standpoints, it's a really interesting example that we invite everyone to watch, especially if this topic resonates with you.
Yes, absolutely.
And then now again, Alina, we're staying with you to talk about how costume design for film is different from design for theater. And I know we could talk for hours for that.
Yeah,
It's
I will
the
be
topic of your class, right? So it will be in a nutshell approach for those of our attendees who are not costume design experts, and a quick refresher, bringing us on the same page for those who are specialists in the topic. So the process of designing for film, Alina, over to you.
The process for designing for film, same as stage, is starting with studying the script or play, or in this situation, the screenplay. So obviously designer is reading the script and then goes to a certain amount of research and breaking the story, script breakdown. And after getting familiar with the characters and the storyline, designer comes to the meeting with director. And here again, Diana, thank you for bringing, absolutely. And especially starting from 1970s, we would say that this is a break line where costume designers like Hersha Steinbock, who were able to, design and construct all costume pieces as she wanted. In 1970s, there was a crisis in the industry, in the film industry. And so some budget problems came to costume design. And so we completely changed the approach to the costume design that way. And so now director is a leading man or woman in a film. And basically the screen, what you see in the screen is a creation of the director, and costume designer is a servant to the visual story that is created by director. And even after every shootings are done, director sits with editor and completely, changing the angle of the film, kind of bringing its own personality. So the input from director is always important, and every costume piece has to be approved by director. So that's why it's really important to create this system of trust, so costume designer can make some changes and can actually bring its vision. But those meetings with director are one of the important kind of steps in a design. And then after, the team will create the concept approach to the film. Costume designer comes to probably the most creative part of the job is design research. And it's same as a fashion designer creating the inspirational board. Costume designer creates research board, research presentation with, huge amount of images talking about the world in general or specific details of wardrobe. That is probably the favorite part of most costume designers, where they can actually express themselves and be free in their mind. And then again, so every step has to be confirmed with director. So I will just skip that, right? But everybody getting that. So after design board is ready, again, director comes and there is conversation about it. And then once the key elements are found, we are coming to sketches. We do have separate slide, right?
For slide for that, yes. So now let's summarize that. We'll talk through sketching, costume construction, purchase, costume fittings, and shooting on set. And we'll take a little sidestep to talk about some challenges. I really love that example that you brought up about printed fabrics being very challenging on screen. Why so?
All right, and so this is talking about the difference between, theater and screen, where a designer has to be really knowledgeable and experienced about how everything looks on screen. And first is the printed fabrics. In a real life for fashion, you can choose whatever you want because it looks completely different. In a screen, we all depend on what camera is used, what color palette, and some of the screens really could be strobe guilty and create kind of dizzy feeling. So for example, these are samples of totally inappropriate fabrics. And some director will just say, okay, no white, no black, no stripes, some rules which are really limiting costume designers' approach to.
Especially when designing period specific garments, so color.
Yes, another thing that we can't use any colors we want. We need to see how colors will look in a filter with director of photography and lighting designer. And again, here, for example, a sample of conceptual approach, how Spielberg really wanted to bring some red splashes to black and white film, or where completely, green photography layer would come over the all costumes, and everything is kind of greenish, kind of muted in a color palette. And today we will talk about black and white film for Trish. So movement, and many people would say on stage, of course, we consider movements, and dance probably one of the media where costume design consider movements the most. But in film, many times we have absolutely crazy experiments, and especially in blockbusters. So costume designers has to think about how the character and how talent will feel in a costume for the action, for the moment. And then also don't forget that many actions are happened not by the talent, they happen by the stunt. And so how many costumes actually needs to fit different body and look very similar are very important. So there is plenty of practical considerations behind the kind of, easy 1 second shot on screen.
Yeah, in action film, there might be up to 3-4 actors who are impersonificating one character on screen in different.
Yes, and here for the moment we have sample of this like really action film, but even for historical films, you can imagine that 300 years ago in those corsets, women didn't make those actions that they sometimes required to do in a film. And so how actor feels in a historical clothing, how it needs to be adapted to the screen, to the modern body, is really, significant knowledge that costume designer need to bring in the fittings. Anybody wants to talk about attention to detail? Isn't it the most
amazing films? Yes,
that screen can give us? On stage, costumes has to be exaggerated because they're seen by audience from distance. And here, screen definitely bring us the close-up, all stitches, all distress details. Everybody wants to add your favorite details in the costumes?
Alexey, Diane, and Hersha, we'll move forward. Then there will be moments to
all right, good,
comment on that as well. So sketching.
Mm-hmm. And for sketching, I mentioned in the beginning that Edith had was kind of traditional trend for sketching watercolor on a white paper. Right now, it's amazing how many different techniques are brought by costume designers, all possible materials, and of course, digital techniques. And in film, unlike in theater, many times costume designer hire specific costume illustrator, because the amount of costumes is like 1,000 sketches has to be done, and no living person can make it happen in 24 hours per day. So that's why there is even specific job description for making character sketches for the film set. So those students who are interested in this can explore that opportunity. And digital sketching now is absolutely popular in film design.
Interesting. Thank you.
And in this sample, you just can see, can we come back, how sketch is actually different from realized costume, right? So sketch is still imaginative stage of the costume design. And so it's not always coming completely exactly the same as it was planned.
Right, but that's all right, right? That's considered a
Absolutely, yes.
as long
There's
as
nothing set until it's on screen,
Right. And then the behind the scenes of
all right, so
construction.
here we will talk very briefly about practical part of the costume design. And designers have usually choice of 3 options, unlike those first designers in the golden age of Hollywood, where all pieces was constructed from the sketch. Right now, most times we consider who are, main characters, most significant talents in a film. Those needs construction. And then many costumes are purchased, because unlike in theater, usually we need lots of multiple of the same costumes. Like one single shirt that you see on screen, costume designer probably will have 5 same shirts like that for the shooting and practical purposes. And then many costume warehouses are offering collections of costumes which are existing already. And there are even some blogs which could be interesting for journalism majors. There are some blogs where people who are, big fans of films post one dress that was used in several films, and how, that one piece from Western costumes in Los Angeles, for example, could be used in a film in 1970s, and it's a little bit transformed, and we can see it in a modern time. Then, buttons change and it's again on films. And so that is, a little
fascinating. Well, it's hard to track though. I mean, one should be really attentive to.
There are some blogs where people actually focuses on finding, same piece from, costume shop in Angels in London, and, Western costumes, how they are traveling from film to film and used by different designers.
This is amazing. Alina, if you'll have them handy, if you want to share them afterwards, and I'll add them to the resources of the workshop. But those are,
okay, yes, I'll raise it.
Those are journalism stories. That's amazing.
Okay, yes. And so obviously one of the main time spending for costume designer after design is approved is costume fittings, because everything has to realize and feel body appropriately. And this is kind of intimate place where costume designer really listening to the talent, what are needs of the body, how they understand character, and create those relationships. Costume fittings, sometimes in a costume fitting we have like 5 different people, so it's not just a designer, it's a draper, it's a craft person, it's a person who is doing shoes, a costume design assistant who is taking notes, PA in costume design who is taking picture. So it's really almost like a dance around the talent where the character comes to the live stage. So this is
team effort.
Yeah, this is really a beautiful moment. And then kind of the final stage for costume designer to be on set present, although of course, one person can cover everything, and there is a lots of profession in the costume design, like for example, dress setter, or again, PA who is taking care of the actor on set and taking continuity pictures. So the look is the same from screen in different scenes. And so you can see how people are actually adjusting the look so it's precisely the same. Or for example, there was a distress that done previously and it needs to be repeated. So again, several people are dancing around the talent, trying to figure it out. So there is no pin scene, or the tag from the purchase is not, hanging on a dress. So all of those details has to be looked at on set. And basically this is the final stage of the costume designer work. Once film shoot, then editor and director are playing the crew role.
So definitely all those stages, when we're talking about not big productions, but smaller independent movie productions, quite often that would be a smaller team that will be wearing many, many hats. So
Absolutely. Welcome to Academy of Arts University. For example, when our students are designing films in our entertainment department, previously it was motion picture and television, and now they call it the entertainment department. Yes, usually our costume design student is taking all of those roles, and we do research, we do sketch, we are pulling or building costumes, shopping, and then spend 14 hours on set, putting together and taking care of all our actors. Obviously, when you are starting your career, next 15 years, you're trying to build up and trying different roles.
You're doing everything.
The only way to become a, costume designer in a feature film.
And receive your Oscars. I remember when once I had a chance to be on set with you and your students with MPT department, and what really was mesmerizing to see was that famous sort of, you called it Bible. It was like a big folder book where you were tracking costumes so that there is a continuity between shooting days, say, because shooting doesn't happen, and the chronological sequence of the film, all sorts of conditions, right? And so there should be continuity between how the character looks on that shoot. Yeah, could you comment on that? That was really, so again, an interesting detail that we wouldn't think about if we're not in the
today we talk about glamorous part of costume design, right? About creativity and color choices. Of course, costume designers have a lot of organizing work and paperwork and all that really boring but extremely important part. And so that's why costume designer is actually leader of the team, especially in the big films where, up to 20 people can work with costume designers. There would be one PA who is starting and just in charge of the Bible, just in charge of continuity pictures. Another person would be in charge of, selecting how many looks each actor have and organizing the rack of the costume. So it's really a lot of work and long hours.
Thank you, Alina. So we're moving forward to writing about costume design. And although I'd love to hear about your favorite examples of writing about costume design for film, if you have some to share with us. But if not, we can kind of fast forward, shift to discussing the upcoming Academy Awards nominees. A part that's really kind of brings us to the current moment. I did share one story though that again was suggested by Alina, that's recalling Giorgio Armani's best fashion moments on film. That's just one of the example of how the angle can be. And I invite you all to jump into the discussion about the upcoming Academy Awards and the current films, and then we can read through about what are the angles that we journalists can explore when writing about costume design. So let's move forward and discuss 4 nominees for Academy Awards this year. So Alexey, over to you if you'd like to comment on which can introduce each designer, and then we'll hear from Alina and Diane and Hersha, if you'd like to comment, you're welcome to. I know you're maybe are not prepared, but again, chime in whenever you feel.
Absolutely, and I will kind of keep track of my notes here to make sure I hit the key points. But before we start, I want to kind of acknowledge that we're talking about Academy Awards, and so this is a Hollywood, and we're drawing on Hollywood examples in our conversation. But relationship between costume and film is equally profound in other film industries, in Bollywood and Nollywood in Nigeria, or the world of telenovelas, that has its own codes and has its own, stars and its own lineage of examples and references. And so, and billions of people, audience, who draw inspiration from that and read them as part of their own life. So for this, our focus is with Hollywood output and with the Oscars coming up. So very briefly, I'll tell you just highlights from the 5 nominees, so we know who to root for on the Sunday ceremony. So first up is Anne Roth for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Anne Roth is 89 years old. She's a veteran in the industry, and she has worked as a costume designer on over 125 films. So really a tremendously prolific career over a span of many, many years. And this is our 4th nomination out of 125 films. So that's the kind of bets, odding bets, betting odds rather, that 125 pictures gets you 4 nominations if you're really, 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 really good. And she is. And for this particular film, I think some of the challenges are, of course, it's a period piece about the era of the rise of the blues, and dressing Viola Davis into an iconic character. So when you have a major star and they have to look like a certain historical figure, that is an added layer of complexity there. And so another notable thing that I think has maybe a plus for this is that she also designed costumes for Chadwick Boseman, who's in this film, and this is his, of course, last screen performance. So there's a lot of poignancy riding on this nomination and in this particular year. And next slide.
Let's comment on Anne Roth, because we
let me jump in, Elena. Let me jump in. She's definitely the front runner right now. Variety and Hollywood Reporter both have Anne Roth as front runner, no question. Partly because of her deep admiration in the business throughout, deeply professional woman, fantastic career, whatever her age is. Also, there's a feeling that she deserves it, but also that the production and the costume designs here were superb. So by far, she's the front runner. Emma, not so much, and the others trailing far behind. So expect to see her in the awards.
Hopefully, yes, we're rooting for her. So next one, Alexander Byrne for Emma.
Yes, this is an interesting nomination. It's Alexander's 6-time nominee, including winning an Oscar for Elizabeth, or one of the 2 Elizabeths. I forget which one that she did costumes for. The thing about Emma is, as we have already talked today, is just like Hollywood can't get enough of Jane Austen. Like every year is just, it's like a perennial. There's going to be a Jane Austen adaptation one way or another. And even Alexander Byrne herself worked on a number of Jane Austen pieces, including one of her big breaks was Persuasion in 1995, something like that. And Persuasion, as I just read the other day, is being remade again, coming out next year. So Jane Austen is here to stay. And I don't know what is it the costumes that drive the appeal because people find it really beautiful? Is it the era itself? This is kind of like the last big hooray for that system of cultural codes that come with monarchy that I think we're going to be seeing, younger generations are not quite into all that altogether. So, but for Alexander Byrne, she's definitely not a newcomer to this period, to this style. And the interesting thing here is that the director of the film comes from the music videos and fashion photography, and so they had to kind of adapt and change that style. And that I think you do also see in costumes. We talked about the relationship between fashion and music videos in the previous workshop, and I think this is an example where you see the influence of music videos going into the film and being evidence in the costumes themselves.
Thank you, Alexey. Hersha, from a history of fashion perspective, why do you think this fascination with Jane Austen and those period?
I'm not really sure, but I love it myself. I mean, so I could maybe speak to it just from the perspective of a viewer. I mean, it's such a sensual experience to look at all the textures and the colors, and I think it's also about nostalgia. This was an era where everything was ordered, and we're looking at an aristocrat who's a privileged person. So obviously this is a slice of life where things proceed according to a different sort of code than a regular, quote, person would have. So we're seeing a slice of life that doesn't exist for most people. And looking back at that, maybe with a kind of nostalgia. And I think that combined with the sensory experience is something people were really hungry for. I was reading that, Bridgerton is another example of, that got really popular, and it was like people were writing about it in the New York Times. I think Vanessa Friedman wrote a whole article about how it's almost like costume design, and the fantasy of it has a special place now in fashion leadership. It's like the costume designers and the films and the portrayals of these historical period pieces are finding a place as leaders in fashion. So maybe it's because of the appeal of the fantasy and the nostalgia, where it's predictable. You know what's going to happen. And it's all good.
Wonderful. Yes, I can't agree more. There is this kind of experiential approach to fashion and kind of diving in that epocha, and the whole cosplay obviously follows through with a desire to be part of it as well. Hence, maybe the additional appeal to the costume design component of those movies.
Like very, very quick, Elena, I'm so sorry. I just posted from Hollywood Reporter article about how Oscar is always really loves historical films and how modern design is underappreciated by awards. So for all students, I actually put that link to the article, and I think it's absolutely gorgeous design. Alexander Byrne is definitely super, super, super hard worker and amazing designer. So it's nothing personal, but that's a thing that every time Oscar needs to have some historical design, and this time it was beginning of 19th century. Another time it's a Renaissance costumes, right? Another it's Victorian 19th. So people just love historical clothing, and especially those who are selecting films for awards, I guess.
Right. And Alina, I did include that article in the slideshow, so there will be a link to it at the end of it. So when we'll talk about more kind of controversial topics, where even at the Academy Awards, we would maybe love to see more contemporary design, or I'll talk about the artists who are not in the period and fantasy categories. So we'll get to that part, and we'll reiterate on that again. So another very kind of locally tied in and another period and fantasy story. Milan. Alexey.
Yeah, so Bina Degler is a Spanish designer, and it's I live in Spain now, and so it's big news here that she's nominated, and a point of pride. This film, of course, was part of the kind of the controversies where you know, it was initially the controversy around that a Spanish designer was selected to design costumes for a film that is set in China and is so deeply rooted in that culture and history. And that, I think, it's an ongoing conversation that we will see crossover from fashion and conversation about cultural appropriation over into the film language, and, you know, who and how and design process gets done and who gets credit for it. And so I think it's part of a larger conversation, but as a singular achievement for this film, it is quite warranted, because it was extraordinarily period and culture specific, and the sheer volume of what needed to be produced with that kind of attention to detail, from these, you know, court gowns to the massive battlefield armor, and everything in between. It's definitely an earned nomination. It's her, I believe, her first nomination. But she's not a stranger to Oscars, because she's designed most of costumes for Pedro Almodovar, for example, who has won for All About My Mother and been nominated last year as well, the Spanish director. So she is of that level, of that stature of Academy Award winning film production. So we'll see if she has a chance here, but probably maybe a little too controversial to actually award in this particular year or moving forward. So
exactly, yeah, the controversy is definitely present across the entire story of this movie. There were a lot of cultural discrepancies, I might say, that film may be criticized for, starting from a very kind of independent female leading role, kind of rebel female character as well. So again, it might be hard to get into that direction now, but again, this entire production, I think, is full of various controversies. So let's see how it gets received at the Academy Awards. And again, as much as I would wish success to Bina Degler as costume designer, I'm afraid that she might be not an obvious choice as a winner. But again, spectacular success for her, and again, surprising to see a Spanish-born designer designing for Chinese cultural story. Diane or Hersha or Alina, if you'd like to chime on this, you're welcome.
Yes, the artistry of this film is exquisite, as you can see from the previous image. The art direction, the production, the exquisite colors here, the makeup, every aspect really gains great respect from the Academy, and they would appreciate the teamwork, the collaboration, the cinematography. And so this one is generally considered the second possibility for a win, very admired. I don't think the Academy gets too involved with something like cultural appropriation. It's such a difficult and widely used expression. But I think in terms of the Academy, most of the people in the Academy are on the creative side. And so they think of it as expression, artistic expression, creativity, ideas, collaboration, the ultimate expression in the film, rather than should a Spanish designer be designing this for this film. I think that the Academy vote is not going to be affected by that at all, but rather by the beauty and the artistry that's expressed in the film.
So true. Thank you.
Quite likely, and I think, you know, it is a newer subject or a newer lens with which people, you know, are looking at cultural production across all media, in music and film and fashion, and it's a point for a conversation moving forward. I think it is a Disney film, and an interesting thing there is that in all of Disney's history, it's one of the most awarded companies, but they only had 2 Academy Awards for costume. Black Panther and I'm forgetting the other one prior to that. So, but it's, you know,
Alice in Wonderland, Alex.
Alice in Wonderland, yes, Alice in Wonderland, the Tim Burton version, and then Black Panther. And now this is their, you know, third shot at it. So they're apparently Disney is finally getting better at costumes. Maybe that's the takeaway. Just after all of that time, they're finally getting it right. So let's see the next nominee. Trish Somerville, we've looked at the work and references already. It is Trish Somerville's first nomination. Monk is a film directed by David Fincher, and Trish Somerville and David Fincher have done a number of films together, and that goes back to our earlier example that Alina was making about collaborative power of a director, and that everything needs to be, you know, everything goes through the director, and the costume designer needs to work very closely. So we do see quite often that costume designer as well as a cinematographer are long-term collaborators of directors. Directors make multiple pictures together because they develop this ability to know what's going to work, and it makes it easier for everybody. For this particular picture, of course, it's a throwback to the production of Citizen Kane, one of the kind of iconic Hollywood films, and so it has all that historical old Hollywood lure and lore all in each shot, and that is extremely appealing for the Academy. As a sort of a celebration of itself. The only other thing I would note about Trish Somerville, I mentioned that there's one designer who is also has a crossover into actual fashion industry, and that's her. She did an H&M collaboration, a capsule collection when Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, another David Fincher film, came out. All the other nominees are focused on costume design, but Trish Somerville sort of has this ability to shapeshift a little bit in the industry and also work with designer brands. Do folks have any feedback on Trish Somerville and or the work from Monk?
Alina or Diane, if you'd like to comment.
The film is very highly admired and will doubtless win several awards. I think probably not for costume, just as one of the students comments that film fantasy generally doesn't get too much attention in the awards, nor do films where most of the actors are men and it's not period costume. This does look very authentic to that moment, but I think and the women's costumes were interesting but rather one-dimensional. I think I admire her work, but I don't think it's incredibly creative, and I don't think it stands out in this group where Anne Roth, her creativity and recreation of costumes from 1927 Chicago is masterful. You don't get such a sense of the period here, I think, from the designer.
Yeah, I just want to say that here, I'm not sure that they actually had goal to have it absolutely historically accurate. I think it's very experimental approach to costume design and trying to see what works for the textiles. I've seen interview with Trisha, and she was saying that, for example, the pink rose, the dusty rose color, which is, very trendy now, was looking the best on a screen for the black and white. And so just like this kind of the journey of the costume designer, how to translate color costumes for the black screen. Or for example, her notes to director, please don't look at stage, look at the screen, so he can actually see it immediately through the lens of black and white, where, for example, she needed to take all fitting pictures definitely in the black and white mode. So like to see how it's, yeah, absolutely. It's not amazingly spectacle costumes, but it's a lots of work behind in order to make it this precise and detailed.
And create this splendor.
And I think this actually points to kind of one of the underlying questions of this particular category is, what is it for? You know, what are we actually evaluating? Because I think as audience members, we kind of go, oh, like, you know, I was not wowed by that, or that looked just weird to me, or that was just a beautiful gown. But I think, and we don't do that for fashion designers, you know, like we don't have, you know, there's no, fashion doesn't run on that type of award system. And so here the award is not, because the award is not comparing actually, you know, Mulan to Monk in terms of the content of it. I think it's the evaluation of the work of the designer, specifically in the evaluation of the labor, yeah, the attention to detail that went to research, to complexity that was involved in getting it done for the screen. So thank you for pointing out both that, you know, it can, regardless of what it looks like, professional eye of the Academy voters who would vote in that category is trained differently than the professional eye of writers, of cinematographers, and they evaluate it from a different perspective than you know, most of us would.
Absolutely. So that's through the journalistic perspective. But let's move forward to the last nominee.
And the fifth nomination is for Massimo Cantini Parini for Matteo Garrone's adaptation of Pinocchio. It actually came out in 2019, but it made its release in the States in 2020, and that's why it qualifies for the 2021 Oscars. But the work on the film actually started in like 2017, so which is another way of showing that for costume designers, the road to the Oscars is multi-year adventure. You know, it's a long marathon. Unlike with fashion videos that sometimes can, you know, happen in the span of a week and you're done. These films take a really long time to develop. So the interesting thing about nomination of Massimo Cantini Parini is he is the 15th, I think, Italian designer to be nominated in this category. And the other interesting thing about him is that most of the inspiration and textiles and actually some of the garments that he used in the film in adapting it, he took from his own personal collection. He's one of Italy's most renowned old antique fashion collectors. Pieces in his collection go back to the 17th century, and actually he's had a number of fashion exhibitions of his collection, so he really is quite rooted in that world, and it really helped him to design a wardrobe for a fairy tale that is, you know, it's part of the global culture that's known in many cultures. And so it is also his first nomination. And it was, the film was a bestseller, the highest box office in Italy, sorry, when it came out. And actually its popularity was such that even the book of the costumes became a bestseller as well. Like the impact that this film had within Italy was profound, and I think it would be another example where it's the kind of understanding the type of conceptual and physical labor that goes into creating this that gets him that nomination. And not just that, oh, you know, it's a fairy tale we've seen a million times, and yes, they look like dolls, you know. So it's a different approach to evaluating why they're there. So these are the nominees. I would point out that so the Costume Guild, the Guild of Costume Designers Guild, has held its awards already. But they vote in different categories. They vote for a period piece, fantasy film, and a contemporary film, to kind of try to differentiate, and that it's not all lumped in together. And in those categories, Anne Roth won for My Rainey's Black Bottom for period piece, Moulin won for fantasy film, and then for contemporary, it was
Nancy Steiner.
Nancy Steiner for Promising Young Woman won the contemporary design category, so this also puts My Rainey's Black Bottom and Mulan towards the front runners of Sunday's awards, because it's the crossover between the Academy voters and the guild members is very high.
Right. Yeah, the complicated intrigue behind the scenes that's happening.
Yeah.
So for Pinocchio, Alina or Diane and Hersha, if you'd like to comment on that particular film, or we can continue and start wrapping it up and reading questions from the chat. So if no more specific comments on Pinocchio, then we'll move forward.
These
Alina.
costumes are in a museum now, right, in Tuscany. So this is obviously like really highly professionally done costumes. And I just want to say that I really appreciate that lately many designers are actually focusing on distress in the costume, that level of realism that usually we do in a theater. In film, sometimes we have the term like screen appropriate or screen poor. Sometimes you can see some character like a leading talent who's supposed to look in like raggedy clothing, but then we'll look them like shine and really beautiful costumes. So it is kind of unrealistic approach to the leading characters could be seen. Here, the level of distress and details are really there. Same, with some historical clothing, like in the crowns, we see Renaissance costumes. They are just coming out of costume shop, right? Like they're not lived in. And that is a problem in some TV series. Here, they are actually belong, like we can see history, like those characters, not just bought them, not just put it, right? They lived in, they really feel it. So that was amazing approach. Wonderful.
Yes, Alina, a great point. And let's also do a shout out to Italian design, the tradition of costume design, Italian style, and the charm of it and the detail of it. You can see here, but look at the tradition of Visconti, Antonioni, Fellini, all the great Italians until about the 60s and the 70s, and then somewhat into the period of The Godfather, carrying on that Italian tradition. A friend of mine, Theodora Van Runkel, was the designer of the Godfather films here. We seem to have also forgotten Milena Canonero, who's one of the great costume designers. Everyone was so influenced by Out of Africa, and that was Milena Canonero. She certainly deserves some recognition, but that was pure costume. All of those were created. And there are two very important points to make about costume. Really, the least of costume design is personal design. It's never the costume designer expressing their personal style or their personal thought about what that should be. There's so many others involved, including art direction, production design overall is highly important in where the costumes are going to be shown. And a lot of that is very apparent in Ma Rainey and the film of Anne Roth. And I think we'll see the production and some of the other arts recognized for that film as well. It's going to sweep the Oscars, I would say. What about contemporary design? Indeed. So contemporary probably starting, we could say, from the 60s, 70s, and then don't forget, of course, Giorgio Armani designing for American Gigolo. That was all Armani style and tremendously influential for many years. Of course, the 60s, Bonnie and Clyde, also my friend Theodora Van Runkel, continues to influence style every year, every season. There seems to be some influence of Bonnie and Clyde, American Gigolo. Some films just stand out in a decade and continue to be influential, whether they won an Academy Award or not. Both of those films I mentioned were nominated. And today I think there's very little period costume, but when it pops up, like The Favorite with Olivia Colman, who won the Oscar for it, it's striking because there's so little period costume today. There'll be some more coming up. The Downton Abbey group is starting to film again. That'll be very popular and very influential. But so the days of costume design and Edith Head dressing Grace Kelly in those wonderful gowns in the Riviera to Catch a Thief was also one of the great costume successes of the history of costume. You can hardly think of it today in terms of contemporary design, really, the fantasy films. And as Karis mentioned, Black Panther, of course, one of the great costume successes of recent time, was hardly contemporary, sort of fantasy almost. And Coming to America, also coming up and very successful. So let's see what happens next year and what influence this year's film has on the following season. And let's hope that a lot of people do watch the Oscars this year and applaud all of the creative people who worked under difficult circumstances and less budgets, fewer costume budgets, more rentals, more of the, as you said, Alina, there are so many different ways that costumes get on the screen, some of them entirely built for that film, many of them rented from Western Costume and all of the other films that and TV. And then don't forget also, so many costume designers haunt vintage costume shops and galleries. And vintage costume has always been a tremendous influence on film, copying it, using it, dressing the actors in period costume has always been a major ongoing theme in costume as well.
Thank you so much, Diane. Actually, the point of bringing up the Academy Awards nominees is not only to highlight them, but also to bring the conversation to the fact that all those who were not nominated, but we love them, we love their work, let's write about them, as journalists.
Yes.
Put all the feathers
always
in work, and having that kind of a news topic that's on everybody's mind is a great moment to write about those who were not nominated, but you think they should, and then dive in their creative process and decorticate it from your perspective, from the angle that you would take. We, during the workshop, showed you a variety of angles, how the costume designer work can be approached, whether it can be an analysis of how accurate they were, or whether it would be an admiration for a conceptual component that the costume design would be bringing that otherwise wouldn't be in the film. It's something that the designer brought, and it's not pertaining to that particular period, or whether it's a fantasy drama where costume designer contributes to create that fantasy world and create those codes that come from that imaginary approach to fashion. So from that perspective, I'll briefly show you guys where you can find our other workshops on YouTube, share my contacts, and then I'll stop sharing my screen and bring everyone on the big screen now. And we'll review the questions that we had in the chat. And then when all the attendees, I'll share with you guys the chat content as well, so you can get in touch with each other. I see that there were so many films mentioned that were not part of our presentation, but I'm glad you were able to share them in that collective stream of thoughts and ideas. There were a few questions though, so I'll I'll address the question starting from those who arrived latest, and I apologize for those who posted their questions earlier. So the question from Bibi asked, who is joining us from Montpellier, right? Bonjour, Bibi. So the question is, do costume designers collaborate with the fashion designers for their actors on the runway? So are there other collaborations between costume designers with fashion designers, but for the runway collections, right? So Bibi, your question is whether costume designers' work comes to fashion industry and apparel design, right?
Well, especially for like the Oscars, I'm sure like that's the moment, especially for the actors, to kind of represent the brand, the movie that they've put themselves into. And it seems like opportunistic for the costume designers to help the fashion designers help evolve like what they're going to be seen as in front of all of these photographers and public. So is there any ever like, you know, the costume designer from Black Panther working with, I don't know, Gucci to dress Chadwick Boseman, so that there's a shared equilibrium between representing him as like a fashion celebrity, but also representing him as his like original like character and like atmosphere from the movie as well.
Bring it to real life, you mean, right?
Yeah.
So dress the talent outside of the movie. Alina, does that happen?
Dress the talent outside of the movie probably happened, but I don't know much about actually costume designers creating collections for runways, right? Because usually it's just the target is different. We are not selling our costumes, we are creating the character, right? Fashion industry works in completely different frames. But for films, especially, like I would say that many times, because when costume designers in the featured films work with really big names like Robert De Niro, for example, he always will bring his own stylist. And so costume designer will not just collaborate with director, photography, and everything. He will collaborate with Robert De Niro's stylist, and then all together will make those choices. So this system, I can say, is definitely happening. And sometimes stylists are actually doing costume designs for film. So like, let's mention that profession as well.
Right. So that would be headed over to stylists to work on dressing the talent if there is a choice of maybe continuing that.
Many talents bring in their stylists who can consult, let's say, costume designer about their, you know, needs, trend preferences, and all of that. Right. There is a hierarchy over there, very complicated.
Bibi, does it answer your question?
Yeah, essentially, I think it kind of gets at the point.
So it would be more of a stylist work. Caris, I see you were very actively commenting in the chat. If you'd like to ask the question, you just, while I'm scrolling and reviewing other questions. Caris?
We're breaking up a little bit, Elena. I couldn't hear what you asked me. I'm sorry.
Totally. Oh, yes. All right. So yeah, Caris was actively commenting on Black Panther and seeing more of other films that we weren't able to mention in the presentation, and hopefully seeing them getting recognitions next year. So I'm scrolling to see if there were other questions out here. I noticed, yes. So there was another question from you, Bibi. Do costume designers have an easier time deeping into fashion now than the other way around, because they work from project to project rather than direct whole houses? So that was, I think, reflecting to the thought, Alexey, right, that you brought up, that fashion designers being so overwhelmingly busy with producing timely collections several times a year that they're rarely solicited to work on costume design films. So again, question from BB was, do costume designers have an easier time dipping into fashion now than the other way around, because they work from project to project? So you kind of dive into a project specifics and then you switch over completely to something new. Alina, I think it's to you, the question.
All right. Honestly, I don't think it's easier, right? And many times costume designers work on several projects. And you may think that fashion designer is, like director of the house, but costume designer is managing the team of the people who are realizing and shopping and doing fitting. So it is a big job as well. So I don't know how to compare if it's easier. It's different.
It's different, yeah.
Obviously.
Right, I'm
I
checking.
would just note on that very quickly that I think we are not seeing that much crossover at this time, because both industries are like robust and healthy enough to sustain, to keep somebody busy and sustain them both creatively and income-wise. So for like a direct costume designer for Game of Thrones, really, like, why would they want to do a capsule collection for somebody? Like they're kind of occupied enough in this commitment for that not to be maybe even of interest at a certain point. And then I think coming back to previous workshop for a second, I think music videos is possibly where we might see more of that. So if somebody was interested to do costumes or try something more edgy, they're much more likely to go over and do a music video for a star, because it's a shorter commitment. You can be much more creative. It's a much faster turnaround than even developing a collection for a house. So I think that there is now a number of intra-industry opportunities that can satisfy the designers both creatively and economically, so that they don't really need to take that kind of commitments on the other side.
And another comment on this: costume designer creates the costumes, but the rights for their costumes belongs to the company.
That's what I was going to say, Alina.
Absolutely.
You don't have control over this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hersha, you can describe it more.
Well, it just made me think about how they're both types of endeavors are part of huge industries over which they may or may not have, they may have varying degrees of control. But even like a fashion designer, BB, the ones that work for large multinational conglomerates, those are many of them publicly traded companies. They have shares, but they don't own the company. They work for the shareholders. So, the brand they don't own the brand. They don't own the intellectual property in both industries. So therefore, there's this huge sort of scaffolding of people around all of them. And they might be in the center of it, but they don't necessarily have control over all of the moving parts.
I'm sure that costumes for Mulan probably will be sold in a Disneyland, right? As adults, and
that's a really good example.
Clothing, absolutely, to dress up, but the rights belongs to Disney, and costume designers can't produce anything.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So there isn't that kind of autonomy that you would think, someone of that creative magnitude would have. It's all about profit making.
Corporation.
I was going to say too, we should all, I don't know whether we should, but we all tend to pay attention to the other fantasy world that's going on during the Oscars, which is the red carpet. That often gets more attention than the actual awards. And that's a whole other industry.
Another workshop.
Oh my God. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, don't get me started on that.
Oh yes, I wish we could. So getting back to writing about costume design, so obviously mainstream media, lifestyle media and fashion media is writing about it. More specific fashion publications as well, but they would address it from different perspectives. So say Vogue maybe would write about an impact that a movie made on fashion trends for in the industry, in the market, while publications like Variety or Hollywood Reporter or even Vanity Fair would focus more on costume designer creative process and will dive into the whys and the hows of that of how it was made. So again, maybe a quick round of sharing resources where you read about costume design. And Alina, I know you shared a few stories that I will summarize and share with all the attendees as like a list of recommended reading. But what are the sources that you read when it comes to interviews with costume designers for film, more specifically? What are your kind of go-to resources? And what you think should be covered more? What you think lacks attention? So say, as a costume designer, you would like to see more of coverage of what?
All right, we were definitely talking about modern costume design. And the thing is, over there, people have lots of opinions. So modern costume design is the most complicated out of all designs, because for historical, everybody just to see pretty picture, but in modern, everybody can, think and relate to the clothing. And so this is the most complicated to adjust the modern fashion and the actual character. But I also want to pay attention to how costume designers conceptualizing their approaches to design. And this needs some training in journalists and critics to understand what is behind the costume choices. So the process of costume design and how sometimes, there is notes about some pieces being not very historically accurate. Like, for example, in the last film about Queen Elizabeth, right? Like, we definitely see the slash of fashion and historical costumes. But then you have to dig and ask costume designer, what was the goal? Because again, it's a not historical museum, it's an artistic approach to visual story. And so I think the smartest journalists are actually digging into the reasons why costume designer made those choices, what stands behind those details, or that inaccuracy in historical approach, or very exaggerated colors. So I feel that just understanding of conceptualizing of costume design, which is actually, like recent trend, or kind of postmodern approach to the industry, is actually very important. This is what I would say.
Thank you, Alina. I know Alexey has to disconnect soon, and we're wrapping up. We're like 13 minutes over the time that was allotted for this workshop. Alexey, if your last words about what are your sources, were you reading or what costume design?
I tend to catch kind of what enters mainstream, because costume design is not my primarily focus as a fashion journalist as well. But I would say that what I wish to see more of, and I think where there is a great niche, is in talking about the work of all the people that are involved on the set, to help people understand that this is it's a big industry, it employs a lot of people, but also to address the kind of economic maybe disparities that we have discussed earlier. I mentioned Nancy Steiner, who won her Costume Guild Award for Promising Young Woman. In her speech, she made a very powerful statement saying exactly this, that costume designers for film make billions of dollars for this industry, but they're not compensated in a commensurate way. And I think that this also is a fashion journalism story as well, that is not about fashion at all, in a sense. Yeah, but I think there's a lot of angles that are about the actual lives and work of real people making this real jobs, and how they're being compensated or not. I think that there's much more opportunity to write and focus on that. So kind of going beyond the garments, beyond the clothes, and also, and I understand that it possibly is kind of maybe a question of NDAs that designers have to sign, but on Instagram, I love, there's a number of groups, like there's fashion assistants, and there's just add fashion assistants. I think there's wardrobe crisis is the other one. And that's where people, fashion assistants that work on fashion shoots and in fashion production share kind of stories and epic fails and bits and pieces of their daily process and insights, and I feel that that's also like the real work, the real daily life of people on set is what would be tremendously interesting for people as a behind the scenes look at the crazy amount of work that goes into making it happen.
Right. Thank you so much, Alexey. Thank you. And then Buloukhov, I see you raise your hand. Please go and unmute yourself.
Yes, great panel and great discussion as well. I just wanted to follow up on Alexey's point, and if should you have in future something of that nature, happy to take on the topic of fashion law beyond the fact that it is my practice area, but the issues of work for hire that you all raised with respect to commissioned work and then what goes on that back end, the issues of who actually owns the work when you're talking about costume design from a standpoint of it's one thing to commission the work, but what if I'm coming in as the designer creating from scratch up? Who actually owns the illustrations and all the other stuff? And then a lot of the infringement lawsuits or allegations of copyright infringement we've seen, even with the recent Coming to America, where you had a Nigerian designer saying, hey, you used my design and I already, registered it with the design office back in Nigeria, and all of a sudden this design is going global and I'm not getting compensated for it, and so many other things. And then where do you toe the line with respect to cultural appropriation as well? So, and then finally, of course, Alexey, very important, a very key important point on compensation for the people, the backbone really that makes this thing go. Without the costuming, really, do we have a show in terms of award production? So happy to be a part of that in future, should that take place.
Absolutely, Buloukhov will make sure that this conversation takes place. And Buloukhov is teaching a fascinating course with us in Social Media Center dedicated to social media law and ethics, a very popular course. So stay tuned for our future announcements and upcoming workshops that we will be running this semester and in future. So Hersha and Diane, if you would like to briefly comment on what are your thoughts on writing about costume design, more from a journalistic perspective, and virtually.
Actually, please, Elena, if you don't mind, let me just say one thing about the importance of costume design. So I believe it was 2004, I was writing for Mainstream on fashion, and I watch a lot of Bollywood movies. So while I watched, just prior to, I watched a movie that I saw, Sabyasachi Mukherjee, and he designed all the costume for the movie called Black with Amitabh Bachchan, who was the leading character. It was a very interesting story. But I was so moved with the costume design that I contacted my editor in New York, and I said, there's a designer. I went and researched him, and I found out that he had just had part of the UPS award that they were doing with New York Fashion Week at the time. And he was one of the selected designers from on the international end. And at that point, a lot of international designers were not really coming or getting visibility at New York Fashion Week. But I was so moved with his costume that I went and did all that legwork and finally convinced my editor to write the story. So she allowed me to, I called him all the way in India, wrote the story. That story went viral globally, was syndicated globally, and gave him so much visibility by the time he touched down in New York with more media appearances, etc. Today, Sabyasachi Mukherjee is one of the top designers, not only in India, but has done costuming for a lot more films, among other things. So never underestimate the power of putting the details into your costume design, because you never know who's paying attention, and you never know how much of an impact as part of the storyline to tell the story that it might have. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Duak. And if you don't mind sharing the link to the story with me, I'll include it in summarized resources from this workshop that I'll be sharing with everyone tomorrow. If you would like to. Hersha or Diane, if you'd like to comment more on the writing about costume design.
As a writer and a movie lover, I'm really looking forward to the COVID-style, COVID-directed show on Sunday with, I think it's a group hosting, which doesn't sound very interesting, but I'll be watching for the costume design, and I'm fully expecting to see Anne Roth appear and get this award. And it'll be also for her lifetime of work in the industry as well. And that very often happens, that it's someone who has been working and contributing to the movie industry over years, whether they're as a bit part actor who finally, like in, is an actor in Sound of Metal, Paul Raci, and I think he's in his 70s now. He never really, he said, there was a wonderful profile on him, and he never got a break, he said, and finally he's got this fantastic role. His parents were deaf, and the film is about a punk drummer, a punk band drummer who goes deaf. It's a very fascinating film. Riz Ahmed is absolutely electrifying. But there are always awards to people who should have probably had them earlier. They never got a break. They never had the recognition, and suddenly they're in a role. And I think Anne Roth, in fact, only ever won 2 Oscars in her entire career, which is quite extraordinary. And so now this is the opportunity for them to really recognize her and give her a great award. But it's interesting also that this year there's no real controversy among the, quite often there's some shock and horror that someone should be winning. And there's always, the thought of someone that someone thought was brilliant who didn't even receive a nomination. So, there's a quirkiness to it as well. It's not a scientific poll. And especially what I love, it's not popular vote. Popular vote always goes downhill very fast to the lowest common denominator. This is industry professionals voting. And I can't wait to see where that goes and what happens with the rest of the film, and whether the films with 10 nominations, I think Mank has countless, 10 or 12 or 9, some enormous number. It's very possible that they won't end up with any Oscar. And then sometimes another film that's not especially popular or admired gets one very outstanding award. So be prepared for that as well. It'll be fun to watch at home. And the pared down COVID version of it, or is it the post-vaccine version of it? And I think we also, having gone through the last year, I think we're very tolerant of these things as well. We're used to things being a bit muted as well, and for them to be different, and for them also to realize that this could be the direction now for the future, that things are going to be different, the same but different, modified, people with different expectations, different belief systems, different views going forward. But I hope you all enjoy the show and appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to seeing snips and little trailers and however they show the costumes. Sometimes they've even had a little mini parade and shown actual costumes on stage. But I think we'll just see clips of films. So I hope you all enjoy it. I'm looking forward to it.
We as well. Thank you so much, Diane. We definitely are looking forward to the Sunday ceremony, and it's always a big moment where all creative professions collide and meet. Hersha, would you like to comment?
Oh, I just am grateful and thank you all for the opportunity that it gives me and students to learn from the experts here who spoke today. I know I learned a lot. I also think it's possible, to Diane's point, that we could actually be entering the roaring 20s as opposed to the muted 20s. I don't know either. I think we're at kind of an inflection point. It could go either way. I also think just that to some of the other points that were brought up, I think that there is a sense of fashion as a system and costume design as a system having to face challenges to make economic activity generated from these industries more equitable. And I think we're going to see issues of social justice, kind of maybe those kinds of issues begin to mute certain exaggerations that we saw in the past. I don't know, we'll see. I think either way, I think both industries are definitely at an inflection point.
Absolutely.
So thank you again for the opportunity to learn from you guys.
Well, thank you so much, Hersha, for joining us today, and for all of you guys who are journalists in the room or designers with passion for writing. Go on and express yourself, whether it's on your blogs, on Medium, on social media, write about your favorites. They need your support. As Urak said, you never know where your contribution as a journalist or as a writer will lead the designer and yourself. So actively support people whose work you admire. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining the workshop today. Stay tuned for our future announcements. We have one more workshop coming up in May, and the topic will be mental health in fashion journalism. May happens to be Awareness Month for mental health, and I'm so sure that many of you saw in Made in Italy that it's a subject that's being very largely discussed, and in the fashion industry perspective as well. So stay tuned for those announcements, whether it's on social or direct email from myself. And I will share, I already shared with everyone this slideshow. I hope you were able to download it. I will also just email it directly to you with the link to Alexey's story, wrapping up the nominees of this year, as well as the recording that will first appear as Zoom recording, and then later on we'll post it on YouTube sometime later this semester. It does take some time to process. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Elena.
Hersha.
Wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Please stay in touch.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Elena. Take care. Bye-bye.